Aenig by Kaylee. Chapter 2. Ndi stayed at the back of a blonde head the entire flight. She didn't need to look out the window to know exactly what the view would be. Green vegetation as far as the eye could see turned dark in the fading sunset. The earth had taken its land back, after the creatures had wiped out most of humanity and grown with no taming or guidance. It overtook cities and buried towns in layers of grass and plants that would never have bloomed there before. She'd once seen a tree, grown right out the top of a house, while her family was on the run. She'd liked that house, but they never stayed anywhere too long. "Look, we're here," the blonde pilot Silas said from the cockpit, interrupting her memories. The first words he'd said since they took off, since he'd climbed in, drenched in blood, still shaking, and now stung to high heaven. At least she wasn't flying with his friend. The brown-eyed girl had watched them fight those creatures. She had never seen anything like it. Her family had been hiding from them, surviving for heaven only knows how long, nothing. Not watching her grandparents torn limb from limb, not watching her sister writhing in agony after she'd been bitten, and not even when her own father had put a bullet through Ebele's skull. Nothing had come close to the spectacle of that demon killing those things. "Where is here?" she asked, still not willing to look. "The city," Silas answered. "Take a look. I promise you won't be disappointed." It took a lot of willpower. Heights had always proved a problem for the young Gautenger. But she did. There were no words to describe what she saw, except that she hadn't expected it. This hadn't been here when her family had come across the ruined and overgrown city almost 2 weeks ago. It was exactly what Silas had said. It was a city surrounded by a wall and raised on hundreds of stilts. As they circled above it, she saw people. More people than she'd seen in, a long time. Little ants that moved atop what appeared to be a green floor. 8 jets set up circling what looked like a large radio antenna, and her family was down there somewhere. The plane landed, and she was helped from the cockpit, only to be swept off her feet again as her father wrapped his arms around her. Her mother was beside her, and her brother was calling her name. This still didn't seem real. She was convinced she'd soon wake up, and that she would be in that building again, possibly with those things clawing at the doors. A loud sound jerked her from her wondering. "What the hell were you thinking?" The big guy was screaming at the one who'd fought like a man possessed. "You put that girl and Silas in danger, all because you wanted a thrill. You could have got yourself killed." "There were only 5 of them," the smaller man drawled, rubbing his jaw. He looked like the devil, blood dried on his face and in his hair. "I don't know why you're getting your panties in a twist." "You turned off your comms, Kale," the big man shouted, and Ndi wondered how this Kale could not cower in the face of such rage. He was terrified. "The last thing we heard was Silas screaming. Do you have any idea how set Maesh was? Dylan is over, Damien. Everyone is here and accounted for. So get off my back and get over it." Damien looked like he was about to say something else, but eventually he sighed instead. He rubbed his forehead and looked tired. "I'm glad you're not dead." "I'm going to take a shower," Kale deadpanned. "You're going to medical, and then you can go shower," Damien countered. "Yes, Mom," Kale drawled, before heading out of sight. "Sorry you had to see that," the one called Maish said apologetically, drawing Ndi's attention back to her family. "My name is Maish Kutsia. Who are you?" Ndi stared at her father as he stepped forward to take the man's hand. Funny how something as simple as an introduction with a handshake seemed to be a forgotten thing of the past. "Ukwa Obasi," he said formally. "This is my wife, Amara, my daughter Ndi, my son Chi." He didn't even mention Abele. "Nice to meet you," Maish said. Ndi decided that he had a nice smile. "Welcome to the city. I'll be showing you around, but first, you need a checkup." He turned, and the Obasi family followed. "What is this place?" Chi asked, running up to the man's side. Trust Chi to ask questions. Maybe this time they could be answered. "We call this the city," he began. "After the outbreak, the firsts found the text. Once the outbreak was over, they decided to build a sanctuary for survivors, a place where the Memphs couldn't get to us, and where we could be safe. They began gathering people, and with each new person they found, it started to look a little more like reality and less like a dream. Chi looked even more confused than ever. Ndi chuckled as she asked to help the kid out. Memphs? Is that what you call them? Those creatures out there? Yes, Maish answered as they reached the room in the center of the hangar. We just called them zombies, she told him when he pressed a button on the wall. Maish laughed. Most of the survivors we've picked up used to call them that too. The first referred to them as man-eating well, and the acronym just kind of stuck for the rest of us. Her father chuckled, even as her mother glared at the man for using foul language in front of her children. Ndi couldn't remember the last time she'd heard her dad laugh. Trust a KP to do the trick after years of living hell. The door slid open, and they all climbed inside. Maish smiled at the older man. Humor can help us accept our circumstances, make them seem less daunting than they actually are. Personally, I think the name stuck because it's funny. His caramel eyes sparkled with mischief, and he understood why he'd been given the duty of tour guide. It was easy to like the man. The doors opened again, and they stepped into a room that smelled like soap. A petite Indian woman had Silas propped up on a metal table, a stethoscope pressed to his back. He shivered when she ran a hand over his shoulder. You're fine, she said sweetly to the shaking boy. Take a shower and sleep some before dinner. You had a rough day, but you survived. Next time will be easier. The blonde nodded, and with a soft, thanks, Doc, hopped off the table and pulled his shirt up over his bruised shoulders and headed towards them. Silas, who you've already met, and Dr. Aisha, Maish started once they saw them. These are the Abasis, Ukwa, Omara, Ndi, and Chi. They're our latest survivors. Silas offered a strained smile, but left quickly. The doctor was more pleasant. Forgive his rudeness, she apologized for the kid. You were his first mission. It can be hard for some. I'm Aish Govinda, but everyone calls me Doc. Let me take a look at you. Undi watched the woman check her father over. He had scars, and he looked wrecked, like he was suddenly fighting to stay awake. When was the last time you ate? Doc asked. Yesterday, he answered. He sounded regretful. My family haven't. You were the primary protector? Aisha asked, although it seemed that she already knew the answer. It's all right. You did what you had to survive, she reassured, as though there were no doubt in her mind about what she was saying. Your family is safe now. We'll look after them. Amara went next. There's a clinic in the field, Doc prattled on as she checked the woman over. Feel free to come through any time. You might feel sick after your first meal, but don't worry. It's just your system trying to get used to normal food again. Try not to eat too much at dinner, even if you're hungry. It would be better if you build up your diet slowly. You're going to feed us? Chi jumped at the opportunity to go next, sitting very still. Ndi hid a giggle. Her brother could be simple. Be a good boy and you got a reward. Why her parents had even thought to teach him manners in this world, she'd never know. But some supermarkets they had raided had held candy bars, and he was still a child. Of course, Doc smiled at him. You belong to the city now, and if you look after it, it will look after you. What does that mean? Ndi glanced at her dad worriedly, but it was a valid question. With the addition of your family, Maish answered from behind her, the city now has 215 people living here. Someone has to keep it running, so we all pull our weight. Whatever your skills, you'll find where you're needed. Obviously, certain jobs come with perks. The scouts get red meat because protein is important for soldiers. The techs get coffee for their long shifts, but all in all, no job is really more important than another. Some of the civilians have even been known to swap jobs from time to time, just to keep the boredom at bay. What about the jobs that aren't so fun? Ndi asked, crossing her arms over her chest defensively. I assume all the good stuff is already taken? As much as I'd love to tell you otherwise, Maish chuckled awkwardly, that isn't the case. We're all assigned shifts for waste management. The firsts believe it keeps people humble and stops prejudice. Don't worry about it, though. You're at the end of the list, so your turn will only come up in about 6 months or so. The firsts, Ndi scoffed. Sounds like they're above it all. Actually, they do a lot more than the rest of us. Doc smiled warmly, before turning a pointed look at the Capetonian. Maish, you're giving them a lot to process right now, she warned gently. Right, the scout soothed, waving his hands apologetically, before putting on a rather impressive French accent. It'll be a lot to take in, but try to keep up. I will say this only once, he said with a smirk and a wink. Please continue, Ukwa encouraged with a chuckle, obviously getting a reference that Ndi didn't. The city consists of 6 levels, ranging from ground to 5. Right now, we're in Med on level 5. This is where everyone goes if they've been outside the city. Level 4 is where most of the civilians spend their time. We call this the field. It's where you'll eat, sleep, and live, unless you're working. We call level 3 the farm. It's where we grow food and clean water. Level 2 is for the scouts to train, and level 1 holds the generators that power the city. What about the ground level? Ndi asked, and not 2 seconds after, the floor moved. Maish laughed. Ground level would be the legs. The city can walk. Ndi sat down on the table for her turn and couldn't help but laugh. Now I know I'm dreaming. A moving city, this big. The first put a lot of effort into designing it, Maish chuckled. Who are these firsts? Amara asked, the first thing she'd said since their rescue. Well, you've already met 2 of them, Maish answered, and Ndi wondered just how many times the man had given this speech, answered these same questions. Damien Heckart was STF when the outbreak hit. He and his brother Dylan find Kale a few months after, and they've been helping people ever since. They found a lot of survivors at UCT a while after the outbreak's waves ended, and they were barricaded there for, I believe, a year before the mess began piling up at the gates. It took them 2 years to construct the city before it moved. Obviously, there were some hiccups along the way, but we're pretty stable right now. You got rescued at a good time. I would have rather my family been here than out there for the last however many years. Ukwa contradicted the man bluntly. Maish smiled at him, but it was a sad smile. I know. All done here, Doc piped in, breaking the silence before it could form. Why don't you take them to get settled in, Maish? She suggested, helping Ndi off the bed as she spoke to the family. Dylan told us you were coming, so there is a tent already been set up in the field. Someone will come to get you when dinner is ready, and Maish can show you where you can have a shower. Her tone sweetened as she added, we have hot water. No. Ndi didn't believe it. Indeed we do. Doc smiled. They were directed to an elevator, and Ndi couldn't keep the giddy sensation from making her limbs shake. Even though everything was different, and she'd already met more people than she could remember, best of all, this place felt safe. When the doors opened a floor down, she couldn't keep the awe from her face. Dozens of people were bustling around, tents as far as the eye could see, and noise. The silence had been one thing she'd had to get used to when her cell phone had finally died. Here, there was chatter and music and continuous movement. They stepped out, and the floor below her feet was clear. Beneath her, she could see greenhouses filled with plants and chickens. Holy hell! Of all the things in the world to make her begin laughing and crying with joy. Chickens! Looking up, Ndi realized that she could see the silhouette of the Maluti Mountains through the glass walls. Following the stars up, she could see none above her. The top floor had been made from glass too. The only reason that it had appeared green was because the canopy of a massive tree spread out beneath it. She turned around to see that the elevator they'd stepped out of ran up the side of the trunk, which went down and down and down further than she felt comfortable. Humans below, and humans she couldn't see above. It was utterly amazing. It's a lot to take in, I know, Maish said, allowing them time to take in their new home. God only knew he'd needed a few minutes. But it's yours now, as much as it is everyone else's. Thank you. Amara was crying and smiling, and Ndi hugged her brother close. She couldn't think of the word. Their guide walked them through the camp and to a tent, which looked just like every other one. Made from various materials and sewn together in patches, it contained 4 mattresses, with blankets, and when was the last time Ndi had been really warm at night? Oh my God, she breathed. She didn't even care if her mother would smack her for blasphemy. Gee, look, a real bed. I'll show you to the showers, and then you can rest, Mayesh grinned, handing them towels and bloody hell, clothes from an old high school hockey bag at the back of the tent. There will be a bell for dinner. Just follow the people and sit anywhere. You'll find your way around. People were staring at them as they walked between the tents, towards a building on the far side of what they now knew to be the field. Is it because we're new? Yeah, Mayesh nodded before teasing kindly. We don't often get new faces around here. Hello, a woman in a green dress called, running up to greet the newcomers. Come see me when you have a chance. I'll fix those clothes so that they'll actually fit you. My tent's the one with the flowers on it. And then she rushed away. Who was that? Amara asked, concerned. That's Julie, Mayesh sighed. She was a seamstress before the outbreak, and now she makes everything. Clothes, tents, hell, she'll even try her hand at shoes if she has the materials. Be kind to her. She lost her kids to the outbreak, and she's still a little bit on the tender side. He looked at Chi pointedly. Don't take advantage of her. Ah, here we are. The building that stood before them was simple, but it looked cleaner than anything outside had been. Ukwa stopped the man before he could vanish on them. When will we be given our work detail? Mayesh just looked at him in surprised confusion. We don't want to be a burden. Mayesh shook his head and waved his hands animatedly at the man's admission. Oh, not yet. You'll have a week to settle in, but think of what skills you do have. You'll need to go see Doc regularly to make sure you're adapting, but she can suggest jobs, and she'll connect you with the people to get you started. If you have any more questions, just ask around. Most of the civilians here are friendly, if a little shady. He winked. And if you have any trouble, tell Doc and she'll let us know. We look after our own. You don't need to be afraid anymore. He stuck his hand out to Ukwa, but didn't let go when the man shook it. If you cause trouble, though, and we find out about it, we'll kick you out faster than you can say Memph. Have a nice shower. And with that, he left. So that's why he was being so nice, Ndi grumbled. He was building up to tell them that there was a catch to living in this moving utopia. If you didn't pull your weight or make yourself pleasant, you were back on your own. Let's not do anything to stir the pot then, Ukwa said simply. He looked at his family, and for the first time in a long while, he had hope for their future. Meet each other back at the tents, all right? He gave Amara a kiss and patted Ndi's shoulder before leading Chi into the side of the building with a stick figure of a man by the door. Ndi took her mother's hand. The smile had still not quite left her face. It felt so good to be clean again. Ndi felt positively giddy. She couldn't remember the last time she'd felt so good. Gogo had even given her and her mother a small pot of cream in the showers. This was heaven. They were just about to attempt to find their tent again when a familiar voice stopped them. You, new girl! Ndi turned to see the demon man leaning up against an honest-to-God lamppost, made from piping, glass bottles, and Christmas lights. The shadows it cast over him were less than settling. A pit opened up in her stomach when he pushed off it and walked right up to her with a smile that was too excited to mean anything good. I've been waiting for you, new girl. My name is Ndidia Maka, she said, deliberately using her full name to throw off the white boy. She felt her mother step up behind her protectively and held her own. The man cocked his head to the side, poisonous green eyes calculating as he studied her. Ndidi Amaka, he finally said. She didn't like the way he said her name. Are you very tired? She hadn't expected the question, and clearly took too long to answer, because the man seemed to take her surprised silence as the answer he had wanted to hear. Quicker than she thought possible, he'd taken her things from her arms and handed them to her mother. I'll bring her to dinner, he said to the woman, before dismissing her rudely as he pulled Ndi's hand and dragged her off. What are you doing? The girl panicked, tried to push his hand away, but he was incredibly strong. You made the radio that called us to your family, the demon man said, eyes blazing with something unsettling and a crooked smile on his lips. I'm taking you to meet the Tex.